This is Doug Stout. It's January 29th, 2014. We're interviewing Grover Hanger. Grover, where were you born?
Washington County, Ohio.
And in what year?
1926.
I guess I should ask you the date and month.
February the 8th.
Okay. So, it's almost your birthday.
Yeah, almost.
And when did you come to Licking County?
We moved up here in 64.
Okay. And you were World War II
Yes,
in the U.S. Navy?
yes.
And were you enlisted or drafted?
I was drafted, basically. I did ask. They hadn't called, and I knew my time was up, and I went and told them I wanted to go on, so, get it over with. So that kind of, I was going to go anyway.
Right.
Pretty soon.
When did you go in?
The last day of May, 1944.
Okay. And so where did you do your basic training?
Great Lakes, up Illinois.
Yes, sir. And you were there, and then after you got out of basic training, you did what?
I went to Camp Bradford outside of Norfolk, Virginia for an LST training.
Okay. And so then they put you on an LST from there?
Yes, we went to Seneca, Illinois to get the first LST. We rode it down the Illinois to Mississippi to New Orleans. That one was to be converted. 15 of us they took completely off of it, and I went back to Camp Bradford and went through training all over again like I hadn't been there.
How long was that training?
I'm not sure exactly, probably 6 weeks.
So after they trained you again...
Well, to begin with, when I went to get to one in Illinois, they were starting to cut corn on the side of the river.
Okay.
The next LST, I get the middle of January out of Boston.
Oh, my goodness.
Talk about cold. Our first, on the 16th of January, we were headed, of course, towards, I don't know whether we went into New York or down to Norfolk first. We bounced back and forth for a while getting loaded up. We're loaded in Norfolk with ammunition. The tank deck was full of ammunition, mostly 5-inch. It was supposed to be a brand new shell that would, if it got within 100 feet of an airplane, it would blow up on its own.
Huh. Hey, what was your job on the LST?
What was what?
What was your job on the
I was
LST?
just a seaman.
Okay.
My position was the twin 40 on the bow in case of needed. I had the headphones and had the trigger.
Okay.
And of course I had three ways of working it. You could switch over to two guys up behind us, and the gun would follow wherever they pointed their stuff up there. Or we could run it by hand, and I had the part that came up, and the guy on the other side had the part that would crank it around.
Okay.
Then I had a joystick I could use, that I could do all the stuff with it with that joystick without cranking it. And of course the orders came through me to fire.
Okay, so you went back and forth between Norfolk and New York loading up, and so then where did you head out?
I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
But I know I came home. We was getting about ready to leave. I got a 72-hour pass sometime in February, and I think was being loaded up for put pontoons on there. We carried a big pontoon on each side.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we didn't get to Okinawa till after the island had been basically taken. Not taken, but completely, but the main invasion was over.
Right.
And they parked us between two little islands. As soon as you got outside where you could see Okinawa. And them two little islands they had a seaplane tender in there. Well, something bigger or smaller would come to us, and we would give them ammunition, or something bigger, we would give ammunition to them. We were just getting underway this afternoon or evening, I'm not sure now time-wise, but this suicide plane came right over top of us and went across and hit a seaplane tender. Them islands, the sea would break up the waves so seaplanes could land in there, and that tender would refuel them or parts them, give them parts if they needed it, or do repair to them. But it didn't seem to do much damage to it.
Huh.
We got to go ashore there for an afternoon, and we were headed up towards the hill part, and we found this kid was going through a dead Jap's pockets looking for his money. I think he found some. Anyway, they kept suicide boats there on that island, and as far if my recollection, well, as far as I was concerned, those were powered by Chevrolet engines.
Really?
Oh, it looked exactly to me like a Chevrolet engine.
Huh.
And they had brought them down close to the water and burned them, got rid of them, of course. And they would add little tracks that they could run them up into the hills and hide them in a tunnel.
Yeah.
And probably bring them down at night. Anyway, I went to the top of that mountain, but I didn't want to walk all the way back up the other side, so I didn't go down the other side.
I thought one of the people that told me to call you, did he tell me that you originally wanted to be a Marine?
Yes, that's true. I went in on the last day of May, and they said, I see some of you wanted to go to Marines, and they said, sorry, we just filled that quota yesterday. You're all going to the Navy.
Okay.
And I lucked out that time.
Yeah.
And it's just like getting that second LST.
Yes.
When I get in the South Pacific, I heard that guys I went through boot camp with was killed making a landing on Iwo Jima. My position was that twin 40 on the bow, the first thing they'd be shooting at.
Mercy.
Yeah.
So from Okinawa, where did you go?
Back down by Saipan. To give you an idea, we stopped at Inuitok. There was another place, I can't remember where, but we stopped overnight and loaded smoke pots up. I spent all night loading the deck up with them smoke pots, so when we got to Okinawa, when planes would be coming in, we'd make a smoke screen.
Okay.
Anyway, then we'd stopped at Guam. And then on the way back from Okinawa, we stopped at Saipan. Our flour had got weevil in it. And we tried getting new flour, and it was no better than the last. But anyway, then we went from there to the Philippines and loaded up to make our first trip to Japan. In the meantime, my position was always on that bow, standing watch. Well, I thought one day, I'd like to do something different. Just to stand up there and look for something in the water or a distance anyway.
Right. I
said, I don't have to be here anymore. It's not like war's over. I asked if we could go on the helm, and they said, sure. So I wanted to steer that thing. Anyway, the first trip, well, we'd had rough seas before, but I was never in position to see it. But that group, one group anyway, of LST, there was over 50 LSTs in this convoy. There's over 40-some LSMs. Now, that LSM was a little smaller, had a tank deck, basically, but it wasn't covered like on an LST.
Okay.
So you couldn't load the top deck. There was no top deck to load. Otherwise, the living quarters was half up the tank deck on the LSM, the same as it was on an LST. And anyway, while I was up there, I'm standing at the helm probably. I thought as much as 30 feet, but people disagreed with that a little, said more like 24, 28, somewhere in that area. Anyway, I look over in that big storm that hit Okinawa after the war.
Yes.
I look, we was in the we left during that time, and I looked over and I couldn't see the LST beside of us. I could see all the rest of them. Everywhere I looked, there was an LST, forward, aft, beside of us, all around us. Pretty soon, here it came. So we had to be in 70-foot waves.
Oh, my goodness.
And both of us had to be down in the hull at the same time, not to see. There was another, I think they said it stood 50-some feet tall, with counting the radar and that kind of stuff up above us.
Right.
And if I can't see no part of that,
Wow.
we had to be in 70-foot waves. Anyway, when we get up to Japan, on our way in, there was an LST that got pushed ashore in a storm. They could not fight heavy winds.
Right.
The winds would push them. You couldn't hold them. In fact, the first day they set out of California, when we headed over, we only gained 50-some miles in 24 hours because we was hitting a heavy headwind.
What would be normal that you'd be able
We
to do?
traveled at normally about 10 mile an hour,
Okay.
9 to 10 knots. If you could run them up to 13, but they wouldn't stand it for very long.
Right.
Shake them apart,
Did-
I guess.
Did the seas? Did you ever have any trouble with seasickness?
No, I didn't.
That's good.
Yeah.
I talked to one other fellow, and he told me, and he was on an LST also. He said that was the most scared he ever was in the war was in an LST during a storm, more than ever under combat. Would you say that's?
He was never in combat.
He was in combat,
Yeah.
but he said the storm scared him worse.
The storm scared him worse.
Did you have that same?
Well, those projectiles on board the LST came to in a little crate. Well, they'd bring them up top deck, and we would break that crate open and pass the signals on. Well, those crates had built up to a huge stack of stuff. So they called in one of them landing craft that would haul a tank ashore, and we loaded that thing up and took it out to sea. And while we was out there was an air raid.
Oh my goodness.
The only time I wasn't scared, but I was away from my general quarters.
Right.
But they knew where I was. There was nothing ever wrong with it or anything, but I was concerned yet.
Right. All right. So you ended up going to Japan after the war?
I made 2 trips to Japan, and the last trip when we come down by Saigon no, what did I tell you that island was?
Saipan?
Saipan, yes. There was a ship there that had the head man over the LSTs, and he was starting to rotate people, putting them on an LST or something that was going to be headed stateside. Well, I got transferred for far as I was concerned, no reason, because I sat there on that LST for 6 weeks to 2 months while he was doing this.
Mm-hmm.
The LST had made another trip to Japan after, and they stopped back by Saipan. Always seemed to stop at Saipan. And they had a Jap rifle for each man and the other fellow that got transferred over there. I got one home. My son has it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether you ever saw one or not, but
No.
they're the crudest things you ever saw. Well, anyway, that's... Then after we left there, we went down to New Guinea and moved a Navy base from Port Moresby to Dutch New Guinea. I looked over one day beside there was 2 LSTs, the other one was down there, and there was a kid from Porterfield, Ohio that I recognized on board the ship. I didn't know his name. I just knew I'd seen him because when we went to school at Belfry, I would see him. And I said, "Hey, Porterfield." Of course, he answered. They said, "Well, come over." So there was no problem. We just down ours and up theirs. The fronts were open on them, loading them up. Anyway, the LST that I, of course, got, second one, the 970 was the second LST. The 997 was this last LST. Well, the head man that was over him had a Jeep, so we kept the Jeep. Our Jeep stayed with us.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, I think he also, that's where I first had pizza.
Really?
Yes. I think this guy knew about pizza, and he was the head man of it, and he ordered supplies in for it. We had pizza almost every few nights. The guy would make up a couple, 3 pans of pizza. Well, we stand and watch one night. I'd seen it out there before, but I bypassed it. Tomatoes, I wasn't real crazy about tomatoes. Anyway, he said, we stand and watch. He said, you go up and get you a piece of pizza and me a piece. And I said, I don't want any of that tomato pie. He said, you bring you one down and me one down. If you don't like it, I'll eat it. Well, I guarantee you he didn't get it. I went back for second. Anyway, that's another little story that's kind of... Now, this had to have been in 45. Yeah, had to have been in 45.
Did you have any contact with any Japanese POWs?
Did I have any what?
Contact with any Japanese POWs?
Oh, yes, I did. At New Guinea. Dutch New Guinea, they had Japanese prisoners unloading our LST. Me and 2 other kids, they had us down there chipping paint. Just as you come down from upstairs to the first little spot there, we was chipping paint there, and then one of the fellows I was friendly with was standing gangway watch, and he had, of course, had a 45 on, and I said, these Japanese were all finished unloading, just standing around down there. And I said to him, we ought to get them Japanese up here to chip this paint. He said, well, come here. And he went out there, and he pointed at this guy to pick up a CO2, set up what CO2 tank,
right.
Oxygen.
Yeah.
Stuff. Anyway, he did, and he pointed 1, 2, 3 of them, come here. And they followed us up, and we give them these chipping hammers. Well, we was doing pretty good, and here one of the head officers came through, and I thought, uh-oh, we're in trouble now. Pretty soon he went on. The next day we had a whole crew of them chipping paint on the side and repainting that LST. So I was the first man to start it, and he was the last one to finish it.
There you go.
And that's something. Then when I got to Hawaii, I came home on a PCS, a little wooden ship.
Uh-huh.
I don't think it was all... The stern would have been over 6 foot off the water to most. We slept, we had to go down and sleep probably below water level on that one. They had a little, as you moved up, there was where you ate, and officers' quarters was there on that level. Then there was another level above that where they would steer the ship. Anyway, I was standing, when you got to that part where they started building on top of that, there was a wood rail there. Well, I was leaning on that wood rail, and this porpoise, I think I could almost touch his back. I was watching out at sea. The ocean was white. I imagine there was some kind of fish feeding on other fish, and they were trying to jump out of the water, or that fish was coming up out of the water if they catch one, whatever. But anyway, that ocean was literally white.
Huh.
They got the guns out one day and let us target practice off the back of that ship. There was me and another fellow who was the only one I think could hit the broadside of a barn standing inside of it. Anyway, they were, I don't know where you know what an albatross is.
Yeah.
It's a big bird.
Yeah.
In fact, the LST I was on, just as break of day, that thing almost sat down on that twin 40 on the bow.
Uh-huh.
And that thing was, I'll bet was, I don't know, maybe as much as 10-foot wingspan.
Wow.
Big. I may be exaggerating that, but it was big.
It was big.
Anyway, so they were shooting at them. So they give me the 30-06, Springfield, old Army, probably World War One, and one shot, and that thing dropped that thing out of the air. They're just like a standing target sailing, you know.
Yeah.
And he said, we won't do that no more. The officer in charge, he said, well, that's bad luck. the captain, that's bad luck. He don't want to do that. So we quit that. Then they dropped a balloon over, and I still had the rifle. And these other guys had all emptied their guns, and then I pulled up and shot it and blew it up. So I was a pretty good shot.
Right. Did you hunt and stuff before the war?
Oh, I talked my dad into buying a little .22 rifle, single shot, Winchester. I think it was $6.
Uh-huh.
And I carried that a lot, just maybe going after the cows, and not necessarily shoot the cows naturally. But anyway, I carried it.
Right.
And so I got pretty good with it.
I was gonna say, so you were used to shooting.
What's that?
You were used to shooting things.
Yes.
Yeah. So before the war, you grew up on a farm?
Did I live on a farm? Yes. I grew up on a farm.
And before the war, is that what you were doing? Were you still down the farm?
I actually had a job. Well, I went to work before I finished school. I worked for a little company in South Parkersburg called Union Slating Company. They made some stuff for the military and different things like that. So you no trouble getting a job.
Right.
And I worked there I went to work there in the fall when I was 16, and then, of course, in March, I think about March or April, when I was 18.
Okay.
So I worked there for a year and a half to 2/3 maybe. Anyway, I had a job when I came back out of the service, but it'd go up, and then it would, the demand they wouldn't have sales, so about Christmas we got laid off every year, and it kept getting longer and longer. So I finally went to work. I worked, I don't know how many different places. I worked for them, and then I worked for a shovel plant, and then I got a call to come to, I was laid off from there, and I got a call back there, and I got a call the same day to go to work for a little sign company. They weren't too little. They were big. They had all of Parkersburg, Marietta, outlying towns, small, Croston, Belpre, of course, and then another part of it was down in Huntington, West Virginia. They were clear to Portsmouth, and
wow,
and had a big. They didn't come too far north on the Ohio River. They went a lot south, at Ironton and Kentucky and different places down there in West Virginia. Of course, that was West Virginia. Anyway, I worked for them for 13 years. Well, what happened? The guy was a part of the family, and he was trying to. He was running it in the ground. He was losing money.
Mm-hmm.
And then he wanted to buy it. Somebody set him straight that he'd done this on purpose.
Right.
So they wouldn't sell it to him. So he went in business for himself. Then he started jumping claims that we had for our signs. We'd have to tear them down and move them and so forth. And that next year we broke even at that. But the woman, well, their granddaughter was pretty much my age. So there was a grandma, a mom, and a daughter. And the daughter finally came in to help run the place a little. Anyway, that granddaughter, I mean.
Yeah.
And they decided to sell it. So they sold it to a guy in Clarksburg, and he sold that end out to that guy. Well, he already had his people working, so he didn't want any of us or need any of us. So he did take a couple guys eventually.
Right.
My brother-in-law was one that was a sign painter, and he needed sign painters, so he took him on, and then he took a guy to help bill post eventually, put the paper signs up.
Uh-huh.
But I was in the construction end of it, done the wiring and all that stuff. At the end, I had a guy over me for several years, but I suppose the last 3-4 years I was kind of running my little crew.
Right.
Then we come up here. I come up here in '63, the fall of '63, and that was my fourth job.
What brought you up here?
What brought me up here?
Yeah.
I had a cousin work there, and he'd been down home sometime in the summer, and Marge was telling him about what had happened to me, that I'd been laid off, and then I went to work for another little sign company, and then I went to work for a construction outfit. Well, I kept people about the construction outfit. People kept telling me that wintertime he'll just work you one day a week, keep you off of unemployment.
Oh, gee.
And I knew that wasn't going to work.
No.
Besides that, started out with the job I was working for him was 50 miles from home. Well, I rode with the crew for a while, and one fact, the boss of us, I knew, grew up with him. But anyway, he finally got the big part done, and just me and another fellow spent all summer up there. And that's when this cousin said, well, they're hiring at Owens, and he wanted to get me into some part of maybe a millwright or something like that, where, mechanic, that kind of stuff. I worked a little electric, I worked carpentry, naturally with wood, but I wasn't skilled to do big wiring, common
Right.
wiring like house wiring and stuff like that. I changed that around, stuff,
Yep. So you retired from Owens?
I first off up here, they hired bosses' sons for those jobs. Then I called my cousin. I said, I haven't heard from him, and so he went out and talked to Blake. He was the man that hired, and he said, well, tell him if he wants to work out in the plant, come on up. So I went to work in the plant. I thought, boy, when the first night there, went in on midnight shift, I said, what have I got myself into now? Lift trucks and mules are humming in the alley out, or little aisleway out behind us. I was working spatial refrigeration right in front of the machines. And of course, they'd be coming in and out of there, hauling the wool away and different things like that. And they had a conveyor there to run building insulation over to another building. Anyway, that I didn't see that much of that. So that's I talked to one of the guys that was in shipping, and he was saying, well, you want to get in shipping. Shipping's a lot better than working out here. So I put it in a transfer, and finally, after I think about 2.5 years, I got in. I should have got in sooner, but just different things happened.
Right.
Yeah.
And you ended up retiring from Owens?
Yes.
When did you retire?
86.
Okay.
That's a long time ago, isn't it?
That's a while ago. Now, I got us off track. Heading back to the war. Did you have to use your guns in combat?
Did they use a gun in combat?
Did you have to? Yes.
One time.
Okay.
And off of Okinawa, they give the order to fire, and from where I sat, I could tell that the guys up behind me weren't leading it enough. They needed to lead it farther.
Right.
And even the 5-inch wasn't getting him. And it was bursting all around. It was a reconnaissance. They might even want to get him for some reason.
Right.
When I was sitting there, we were sitting off Okinawa at that time. As far as I could see one direction, there was ships, small ships like us, of all different sizes.
Mm-hmm.
We sat just close enough that every once in a while the Japs would try to reach out with a shell and hit us. And
right.
It seemed like it was probably closer than it was, but it's probably three football fields away. They knew how close to let us be. We was almost the last one down that way. And every night there, they would shoot flares up, and we would shoot flares up so they wouldn't cross the line, so we could see them crossing if they tried to cross over to our line. So, and that happened night after night. And whenever there'd be a raid, I'd be, of course, that's my gun position, and all the information they passed along, naturally I heard it, and they had they said that the Japanese had got their call synced on, but and there was wanted to land, and they got to looking, and they, we don't have anybody coming in. So they let them go ahead and land and blow them up on the runway.
Okay.
I remember seeing explosions up there.
Uh-huh.
So I'm sure that happened. They were going to take over that air runway up there, and I showed a nephew of mine on a map here where it was, and he said, "Yeah, that's where the air runway was." He was in the Air Force. He naturally way back. I don't know when, Vietnam maybe.
Right. And then, what? When they dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where were you? Do you remember?
I think we were at Saipan. I'm not sure. We could have been. I'm almost sure that's where we were.
Can you remember what? I mean, that was the first time that's ever been used. You know, what your reactions were to that, or did you hear enough about it to even be able to tell much?
Well, naturally I was relieved, but I was never worried out there. For some reason, I don't know why. All we did excuse me.
Sure.
One time we stopped out there in the middle of the ocean, and they opened that front up, and we went swimming. Oh, by the way, an LST couldn't actually be hit with a torpedo. We run too shallow.
Right.
We was almost to Eniwetok. You know, that's the island they blew up after the war.
Okay.
Anyway, I was standing watch, and I saw this streak going by us. Off to our left, I can't remember which is starboard port now, but it was off to our left, standing looking forward. And I called it in, reported it. They said it's just a fish. Well, I watched that streak. There was an LST in front of us, and I watched that streak. Looks like it missed it to the right about as much as it missed us to the left.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the next morning, we saw all these aircraft and small ships headed out. There'd been a merchant ship sunk out there that night. So I'm sure it was a torpedo.
It wasn't a fish.
It wasn't a fish.
Now, you and I have talked before, and you said something about some songs.
What's that?
When you and I have talked before, you said something about some songs, some Navy songs. Singing?
When I worked for the company?
No, when you and I talked before, you mentioned about some Navy songs that you had.
Oh, okay. Now, yes, and I told you about that. I only remember 4 of them. That the main verse is part of them. Oh, the chicken in the Navy, they say, is mighty fine. One jumped off the table and started marking time. Gee, Mom, I want to go home. Oh, gee, Mom, I don't want no more Navy. I want to go home. Oh, the shoes in the Navy, they say, are mighty fine. You ask for number 7s, they give you number 9s. Oh, the coffee in the Navy, they say, is mighty fine. Good for cuts and bruises and tastes like iodine. Oh, the biscuits in the Navy, they say, are mighty fine. One rolled off the table and killed a pal of mine. Now, that's all the 4 I remember.
Right.
That part of it.
Well, that's interesting. Is there anything that you want anybody listening to this in the future, or this generation of kids, to take away from your service in World War II and your experience?
No, you mean, is it all right if they hear it?
No, I mean, what lesson would you like for them to learn from your generation?
You know, I never thought much about that. Let me think on that a minute.
Okay, that's fine.
Well, of course, we couldn't help ourselves in that war. We were attacked, so we had to respond.
Right.
But I hope for myself that we don't jump into wars trying to solve other people's problems. As good as they may seem, it costs us way too much.
Okay.
Like Iraq, or yeah,
Right.
we shouldn't have been there. Over in the other place, Afghanistan, if we wanted to go in there and try and bomb them people that attacked us, then that's fine. Then we should have backed off and just guarded our borders. Spent our money there rather than. It's cost us men's lives. It's cost us money that we are borrowing to take care of it. Now, that's about as much as I can tell you. I don't know whether that answered your question right, but
Yep, that answered it right. Did you get to do an honor flight?
yes, I did. I enjoyed it very much.
That's quite an experience from what I hear.
Yes, it is. I had to have somebody figure out. You go up to this thing and you punch your name in. I think it is. Type it in, and it tells you all your history, where you've been. On part of my retirement or out of the Navy, they mixed me up a little. I left at 979 out of Boston. Then at Saipan, I got transferred to the 997.
Uh-huh.
Well, they had me crossing the international date line and equator on the 997, which I crossed the international date line on the LST 970.
Right.
Then after I'd been over there for a while, got transferred to that other LST, and we went down over the equator. Port Moresby is just is a part. Actually, the southern half of New Guinea belongs to Australia. I don't know whether you knew that or not, but anyway, where Port Moresby, they had a pretty good sized hospital there. And this is odd. I come up here, and there was a lady in our church that was a nurse. I don't know whether it was with the Navy or Army or what. Could have been with the Army. Anyway, she'd been at Port Moresby, and she'd been to the Philippines, which I was there later, always behind her. That's kind of an interesting.
Yeah.
I always thought.
It's a small world.
Yeah.
Now, when did you get out of the service?
June 6th, I believe. It was just like a little over 2 years. I called 2 years and a week.
So June 6th of 46?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any trouble? Were you able to communicate with your family very well while you were in the service?
Oh, yeah, you write letters home all the time.
Okay. So you were getting your mail and things like that?
Yeah, it maybe sometimes take a little while to catch up to you, but generally get there. I think they carried it to a certain area on seaplanes and stuff and delivered it that way. They almost had to. They couldn't otherwise by ship. It would take maybe months.
Yeah. Is there anything else about your experience in the war that you want to share with us?
In the world?
In the war?
Oh, I think I've covered most everything.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to do this, Grover.
You're welcome.